The day I moved into my new home should have been one of peace, relief, and fresh beginnings. Because after years of working double shifts, saving every penny, and planning for the future, I finally had the keys to a place that was mine. A quiet two-story house with a wraparound porch at the edge of town, tucked just far enough away from the suffocating order of subdivisions that I could breathe freely. And as I unloaded boxes from the back of my truck and carried them inside, I couldn't help but smile at the smell of fresh paint and the creak of brand new hardwood floors. Little details that meant freedom, ownership, and the start of something I had worked so hard to achieve. But as is always the case in stories like this, peace doesn't last long when an HOA Karen is within striking distance. And the very first day I moved in, before I had even unpacked my bed frame, I saw her storming across the property line like she owned the ground under her feet. Her manicured hands clutching a leather binder stuffed with papers, her face tight with fury under oversized sunglasses, and her voice sharp as a blade as she barked, "Excuse me, you can't live here. You're in violation of HOA regulations." Which was absurd on its face, because I had chosen this house for one reason above all others. It was outside of any HOA jurisdiction, purchased precisely so I wouldn't have to deal with arbitrary rules and power-drunk neighbors. And as she stood there, tapping her foot on the gravel driveway as though she were waiting for me to apologize and pack up, I felt a surge of anger twist into something steadier, a calm certainty. Because I wasn't about to let anyone take this victory away from me. And so I set the box I was holding down, wiped my hands on my jeans, and looked her dead in the eyes before saying, "Ma'am, I don't know who you think you're talking to, but this house isn't in your HOA, and you don't have a single shred of authority here." And for a split second, her mouth opened and closed like a fish, disbelief written all over her face, before she recovered and launched into a tirade about community standards, property value preservation, and mandatory dues, waving her binder like it was a holy book and she was the prophet of order. But the more she talked, the clearer it became that this wasn't about rules at all. It was about control, about her inability to accept that someone could live within eyesight of her little empire without being subject to her reign. And as neighbors peeked through curtains and pretended not to watch, the air crackled with tension. Because everyone knew Karen. Everyone had felt her iron grip. But no one had dared challenge her. And here I was, on day one, standing in the driveway with boxes at my feet and fire in my voice, telling her that she was wrong, that she was trespassing, and that if she didn't like the sight of my home, she had one option: look the other way. And though she sputtered, screamed, and even threatened to call the board, it was clear that for the first time in a long time, Karen had met her match. And as she stomped away, heels clicking furiously against the pavement, binder clutched like a shield, I knew this was just the opening salvo in a war she wasn't ready to fight. Because unlike the neighbors she had cowed into submission, I had chosen this house for freedom. And I wasn't about to let her or anyone else take that away from me. Karen never takes defeat quietly, and by the second week in my new home, the driveway and mailbox had turned into a battlefield of paper, because every morning I'd step outside to find envelopes plastered with the HOA's seal shoved under my door, fake violation notices taped to the mailbox, and even laminated warnings zip-tied to my porch railing, all filled with laughable accusations. My grass wasn't cut to regulation height, my porch light was non-compliant with HOA-approved fixtures, my truck was unauthorized, and even the color of my shutters somehow violated their precious guidelines. All nonsense, given that I wasn't under their jurisdiction at all, but Karen's strategy was obvious. Bury me in threats, overwhelm me with paper, and scare me into submission, the same way she had cowed dozens of neighbors into silence over the years. And while most people might have felt their stomach knot up at seeing the words, "fines totaling $15,000 due immediately," printed in bold across fake letters, I couldn't help but laugh as I tossed each one into the growing pile inside my living room, because I had already confirmed with the county clerk that my property lay outside the HOA's reach, and their threats were nothing but empty bluster. Yet Karen didn't stop there. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the street gold, I came home to find her standing in the middle of my driveway with two other board members in tow, their arms crossed and faces smug like a pack of wolves circling their prey. And she waved a thick binder of papers in the air before announcing, loud enough for every neighbor within 3 houses to hear, that I was being fined daily and that non-payment would result in a lien on the property. A claim so outrageous it made me bark out a laugh, because not only did she lack the authority, but she didn't even have the jurisdiction. And when I told her that if she didn't get off my driveway, I'd have her arrested for trespassing, her face twisted red with fury, her voice rising as she shrieked about, "How dare you defy the board, and this is a community, not a jungle." But her shouting only drew more curtains twitching, more neighbors peeking, and though none of them stepped forward, I saw the flicker of something in their eyes. Hope. Because for the first time, someone was standing up to Karen. Someone was refusing to bow to her binder and her threats. And that scared her more than anything else. Because if one man could resist, others might follow. So with one final scream about legal action, she stormed back to her SUV, board members scrambling after her, but not before I noticed the tremor in her hand as she fumbled with her keys, a crack in the armor of control she had worn for years. And as she roared off down the street, I knew she wasn't finished, that her next move wouldn't just be paper or words, but something bigger, louder, something meant to break me. But she still hadn't learned the most important truth. I don't break, and I wasn't going anywhere. The very next weekend, Karen returned with reinforcements. And this time, she didn't just bring her binder and her board members. She brought the police. And I'll admit, when I saw 2 squad cars rolling slowly down the street with red and blue lights flashing against the siding of my brand new house, my stomach tightened for a moment. Not out of guilt, but out of disgust. Because I already knew what this was. Another one of Karen's manipulations, another stunt to scare me into surrender. And as the cruiser stopped at the edge of my driveway, she leapt out of her SUV, storming toward the officers, waving that same binder of fake violations in the air like it was gospel, her voice shrill as she announced that I was an illegal occupant, that I was refusing to pay dues owed, and that the board demands immediate eviction. And though she spoke with the conviction of someone who believes she was queen of the neighborhood, the cops' skeptical expressions told a different story. So when they turned to me, hands resting casually on their belts, and asked if I could explain what was happening, I calmly pulled out the folder I'd been keeping ready, the official county documents stamped and signed that showed in black and white that my property sat outside the HOA's jurisdiction, that I owed them nothing, that Karen had no authority here. And as I handed the papers over, one of the officers raised his brows and looked back at Karen with a face that was half amusement, half pity, because the law was not on her side. And the more she ranted, the more obvious it became that she wasn't just overstepping, she was unraveling, her cheeks blotched crimson, her voice cracking as she screamed that this community is mine to protect, her fingers stabbing the air at me like I was some kind of invader. And the officer closest to her finally had to hold up his hand and tell her firmly to step back and calm down. But she wouldn't. She kept shouting, her binder flapping open as paper spilled across my driveway, fluttering in the breeze like the remains of her crumbling authority. And the neighbors, once silent behind their curtains, had started to gather at the ends of their driveways, watching in stunned fascination as their self-proclaimed leader was publicly humiliated, undone by her own arrogance. And I stood there on my porch, arms folded, not needing to raise my voice or lift a finger because the law was doing it for me. The truth was plain. And as the officers finally warned her that filing false claims could result in legal consequences, I saw something I'd never seen before in her eyes. Fear. Not the fear of me, but the fear of losing control, of losing the stranglehold she'd maintained on this community for years. And though she sputtered, tried to regain her composure, and stormed back to her SUV in a rage, I knew this battle was far from over because Karen was the type who would rather burn everything down than admit defeat. But what she didn't realize was that every move she made only dug her hole deeper, and this time she was burying herself in it.
After that public disaster with the police, most people would have slunk back into their house, nursed their pride, and left well enough alone. But not Karen. If anything, the embarrassment only fueled her obsession, and within days, she launched her final desperate attempt to drive me out, storming onto my property with a ragtag group of board members, carrying cameras, measuring tapes, and more bogus paperwork, acting like they were federal agents on a raid. But what she didn't count on was that by then I had grown tired of playing defense. So I stood, waiting on the porch with my phone, already recording, capturing every second of their illegal trespassing, every shrieked demand that I vacate immediately, every pathetic attempt to measure my lawn and scribble down notes as if they were gathering evidence for some trial that would never come. And I asked them, loud enough for the neighbors now gathered openly along the street, whether they had a court order, whether they had a single legal right to be on my land. And when they faltered, stammering, Karen shoved her way forward, her face blotchy and twisted with rage, screaming that the board is the law here and that I'd regret defying her. And that was the exact moment a sheriff's cruiser rolled up, summoned not by me this time, but by one of the neighbors who had finally had enough of Karen's madness. And the sight of that uniformed deputy stepping out, his expression stone cold, sent a ripple of silence through the crowd. And as he listened to me calmly explain while showing him the video proof and property documents, Karen's theatrics crumbled into sputters and denials, her binder slipping from her grip, scattering across the grass like confetti at a parade celebrating her downfall. And the sheriff, after a long moment of listening to both sides, finally turned to her and said the words that broke her facade completely. "Ma'am, you have no authority here, and if you set foot on this property again, you'll be arrested for trespassing." The gasp from the neighbors, the way phones shot up to record, the look on Karen's face as her empire collapsed in real time, it was pure justice. And when she finally screeched one last hollow threat before retreating with her little entourage, she wasn't just leaving my property, she was leaving behind the illusion of control she'd wielded for years. And as I looked out at the faces of neighbors who were smiling now, some even clapping quietly, I knew this wasn't just my victory. It was the beginning of the end for Karen's reign, because the neighborhood had seen the truth. The mask was gone. And from that day forward, no amount of binders, fines, or threats could rebuild the power she had just lost forever.